all you nerds. This is Nerdy by Nature, where we are going to offer you all kinds of nerd information. And our first ever episode, the pilot, is going to be on Spider-Man Far From Home. Everyone's favorite web crawler swung into the theaters in a big way this July 2nd and is doing respectively well at the box office, already grossing over $847 million. It's fun for the whole family, and we highly recommend that you go watch it as soon as possible if you haven't already. And before we dive into all of that fun, I want to take a few moments to introduce ourselves and get you familiar with what the show flow is going to sound like. Charlie, take it away.
Yes. Hello, everyone. This is Charlie. I'm going to be the other host on this show, and I have always been really into movies and everything like that. But with the MCU coming into prominence in the last 10 years or so, it's really sparked my interest in comic books as well. And so, in the last couple of years, I've amassed quite the collection of comic books and gotten really into all of the comic book lore. And I met Tyler at work a little over a year ago, and we really hit it off, and we have a lot of the same interests. So gonna kick it back over to Tyler for him to introduce himself.
All right, thank you, Charlie. And like I said at the top of the show, I'm your other host, and Charlie's absolutely right. We not only have a strong friendship, but a passion for anything comic book related, entertainment, movie news, Marvel news. Maybe not so much the DCU cinematic universe. That's kind of a sore spot for us, wouldn't you say, Charlie?
A little hit or miss, but they're trying to come back. So they've had a couple of good ones in the last couple of years.
We'll see what comes to pass of that. But for the most part, we're just two guys that really love anything nerdy, and we hope that you enjoy the show as well. And we'll try and do our best to be insightful and give you a fair shake of good old-fashioned comic book and nerdy fun. So with that, Charlie, you just recently saw Spider-Man Far From Home for a third time. So third time through, take us through what you felt that third time through.
Yeah, I went with my nephew yesterday, whereas you saw it just the one time when we went. But I will say that it's a really, really good movie, and I really like Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and it didn't really hit all the theories that I thought were going to come to pass, but at the same time, I think they did what they've done with pretty much every other Marvel movie and changed what they needed to make it interesting and entertaining. I highly recommend the movie.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. I feel like there were definitely some areas where they could have done a little bit more, but I think overall, at least for me, one of my biggest takeaways, just one timer through here, is like you said at the top. Spider-Man is played so perfectly by Tom Holland. We were talking about this the other day. You had, of course, Tobey Maguire that started out with the franchise with Sam Raimi, and he was a good Spider-Man, but not so much a good Peter Parker. And then you had the opposite effect with Andrew Garfield in the second reboot attempt that we won't really talk about in depth.
Right.
But, he was a good Peter Parker, not necessarily the best Spider-Man. And with Tom Holland, I feel like you've got the best of both worlds. You've got a perfect Peter Parker and a believable Spider-Man with the wit, the quick quips for all the villains. It just made sense. It's a very good representation of the webhead, I think.
Agreed. I will say that a little going back to Andrew Garfield for a minute, I liked his Spider-Man in that he did give a lot of the quips and stuff as Spider-Man versus Tobey Maguire. He wasn't necessarily as jokey as Andrew Garfield was when he was Spider-Man, but
right.
At the same time, there were a lot of not so great things about that Spider-Man universe. I liked him a lot, but I do love Tom Holland, and I'm glad that he's in the MCU now, so, the past is in the past.
Right, and that brings me to my next point of speaking of moving forward, obviously after Endgame, which is a hell of a movie, of course. With that being said, we really get to see, I think, Tom Holland, Peter Parker, Spider-Man grow and develop into a more mature superhero, a more mature Avenger, and there's plenty of moments throughout this film where he gets very emotional, and rightfully so. You just lost Iron Man. That was a lot to go through, and now he has to battle with that inner struggle of, am I the next Iron Man? Am I worthy of being the next Iron Man? Can I even be the next Iron Man? So there's just a whole lot to unpack in this film, and I think the MCU hits the nail on the head again and delivers a performance that shows us, okay, this could be, if not Captain Marvel, this could be be. I think that the two pillars for the Avengers moving forward are probably going to be Brie Larson as Captain Marvel and Tom Holland as Spider-Man.
Right, and I'm getting the picture that Captain Marvel may not come to be the new leader. She was in Endgame, but she wasn't really prominent in Endgame very much. I mean, she had
Almost disappeared.
right. She had at the first of the movie, and then she made her big entrance in the final battle. I don't think it has anything to do with pressure from the audience or anything like that. I would say that Spider-Man would be a safer bet as the new leader or de facto leader. I do think that they should steer away from him being the next Iron Man and let him just be Spider-Man. Obviously, he does have the backing of Iron Man's company and all of his toys, so that's great and everything, but I want him to utilize that as Spider-Man and not turn into the next Iron Man or Iron Spider or whatever you want to call it.
Right, or a Tony Stark 2.0.
Right.
Yep,
So,
I absolutely agree. And we've given the wall crawler a lot of love here early on, but let's take if you don't mind, let's take a turn here and kind of go walk on the wild side or the dark side,
the dark side.
if you will.
Okay.
The dark side has cookies in milk, by the way, in case you were wondering.
Yeah.
So Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. Me personally, I thought he did a wonderful job in this role because it could be a hard character to play.
Agreed.
And it's one of those that if you don't do it right, it could come across to the average viewer as goofy. Because, I mean, we're talking about a guy that's got a fishbowl for a head and a green jumpsuit and a purple cape. So, I mean, that's really hard to turn into a convincing villain. But I feel like Marvel pulled this one off. Do you agree?
Oh, I definitely think they did, and I think they changed it enough to where they were able to pull it off convincingly. Now, a lot of my theories didn't necessarily come to pass in the movie. I had a lot of Spider-Verse theories, which have not totally been squashed because they've still established the multiverse in the MCU, but at the same time, I think that they did a very good job of keeping the facts from us and what was really going on. But yeah, I really liked Mysterio, and I think it was awesome that it came to be that the reason he had the fishbowl head and everything was he wasn't really in the suit, or he wasn't necessarily doing everything that he said he was doing.
Right,
So,
that concept of misdirection, or that stagehand, look left, look right when I want you to.
right, exactly, and I think they did a good job of doing that, and I think it made it more believable and it made it fit better with the MCU, making him related to Tony. As far as his backstory was really good. I kind of hope that they start steering clear of all of Spider-Man's villains being back related to Tony Stark somehow, but at the same time, I think it works and helps because of the relationship that Spider-Man had with Iron Man and Tony Stark.
Right.
So,
I agree. I think for this film in particular, it was very fitting to draw it up in that way on the screen. And I think for a lot of the viewers that maybe were just the average moviegoer trying to go see yet another Marvel film, they got to enjoy the misdirection that some of the MCU fanboys like us completely expected and knew were coming. We thought, okay, he can't be, this goody two-shoes good guy the whole time. There's got to be a twist. There has to be a moment where, he flips the script. And of course, we see that in the bar scene.
Right.
After Tom Holland leaves, he completely does a great job of flipping over to, he goes from to do good from another multiverse character to slightly kind of crazy and wants to take over the world, which is not uncommon for most villains. But I feel like he pulls it off, but it still pulls that cloak, or kind of the prestige, if you will, is revealed to the average moviegoer. And man, we got to talk about the scene when he actually reaches his peak. So the climax, in my opinion, of the film is not so much even the CGI monsters and tearing up London, but when it's Spider-Man versus Mysterio, and Spider-Man is just in essentially another realm, another dimension, as far as he knows, just that Mysterio mist. So that's
definitely, yeah. The whole major fight scene between Spider-Man and Mysterio was incredible, and it really, honestly, to me, felt like it was ripped right out of the comic books. They even had a part where Mysterio's head was, his fishbowl was a, what do you call those, snow globe type scenario, and that kind of thing was straight from the comic books, and yeah, I think they did a really good job of making him convincing and showing, and Tom Holland did an excellent job of showing how vulnerable he was, especially at the end of that fight when he calls Happy to come help him, and that whole scene where he's like, tell me it's you, tell me something nobody else would know so that I know that it's you. I think that was brilliant, and I think Tom Holland did a great job of showing that, he was still a scared kid.
Right.
And he was beat up. I mean, like crazy beat up. I mean, he got hit by a train. So
and that was an intense moment. You go through that warp of all kinds of different mental imagery that he has to deal with. Not only that, but of course bringing in the fact that Mysterio knew exactly where to. If Spider-Man's heart was a guitar, he knew exactly what string to pluck. I think at one point he even brings a graveyard-style Iron Man suit.
oh yeah, and
back into the frame.
I think, and everybody's been talking about how that could even be a nod to the Marvel Zombies, even because there was a big event in Marvel Comics where they had a whole bunch of zombies versions of themselves that they had to fight.
Now that Phase 5 or something could be a really interesting spin-off or TV series maybe.
I hope they don't do that, but I like that they threw that in, and it just felt like a nod to that.
Kind of a nice touch.
But it was also very emotionally charged, and I just that whole scene, after watching it for the third time last night, it was just crazy and
Right.
awesome. And like I said, I think they did a great job of changing Mysterio's backstory enough to where it was convincing, but still MCU, not straight out of the comics. Because when he did his bar fight reveal speech and connecting it all the way back to Iron Man 1 was awesome to me. And so, like I said, I think that was the easiest way for them to have a character like Mysterio. So
I'd have to agree, and really the only part about that scene that bothered me at all, as far as going back to the bar reveal scene, is I think you and I had talked about this. While it was cool for them to have those callbacks, it also felt just slightly unnecessary to have so many.
yeah, it bordered on the big villain speech, but they did a good job in making it not feel like that to me. I was worried as it went on, and I was just hoping that it wouldn't go on for too long, and I think that they cut it down enough where it didn't feel too long to me. But like I said, all of them being related to Tony Stark versus Spider-Man, I think that they need to start moving closer to Spider-Man's villains and not necessarily Spider-Man's villains connected to Tony Stark.
Right, and I'd completely agree with that, because that would be my biggest worry moving forward, is if it's going to be this new thing of, oh, okay, let's continue to do these callbacks, how cool to use old footage, which is fun for the fans.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with you, there needs to be that separation of, okay, this is a Spider-Man villain, this is an Iron Man villain. Sure, they have some shared villains,
Right.
But there's got to be that continuity.
And I think that moving forward, we are going to see that. I think it was just because it was so fresh off of Endgame and what happened at the end of Endgame and what Spider-Man's dealing with so far, that I think now they can move past all that and make it more Spider-Man centric from here on out, because there's going to be a third Spider-Man at some point.
Arguably so.
And it feels like they might be setting up the Sinister Six. So,
Which I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the next point that while we're on the topics of villains, we've already essentially been teased with the Sinister Six in Homecoming. We saw the exchange of conversation between, the Vulture and I believe it was Scorpion in the jail cell, if I'm not mistaken. And so, with that exchange, we know that the villains are kind of talking about it. Now, whether or not Quentin Beck is still alive, if that was a whole misdirection,
right.
That's still up in the air. We have to see. Of course, we're referring to the scene there towards the end where a pretty awesome scene, honestly, where Spider-Man, if I'm not mistaken, catches the bullet. You've seen it more times than I have.
Every time I watch it, I try and figure out whether it was the bullet or Mysterio's hand, because right as he does it, it looks like he's catching a bullet, but then as they move back, the camera pans back, it shows Spider-Man holding Mysterio's arm.
Right, with the wrist in hand. Yep.
So I don't know, when it happens, it sure seems like he's catching the bullet to me. But at the same time, it may just be a trickery with the camera, and it ends up being his hand and not the bullet.
Right.
So
it could very well be, but I'd still, for me, with Mysterio being Mysterio, I would find it very hard to believe that he's not still going to be a part of it somehow, because the original Sinister Six is Dr. Octopus, Vulture, Electro, Mysterio, Kraven, and Sandman, all of which except with the exception of Craven, we've seen in some realm, form, or fashion across multiple Spider-Man
Right.
franchises. So I feel like they're, like you said, they're really hinting hard at a possible Sinister Six at
Right.
some point moving forward.
And I think the fact that they were setting that up in the Andrew Garfield universe to begin with, I think is a clear sign that they want to go that route. Of course, in the comics, the Sinister Six has involved several different teams, so they could play around with that. But another nod that they didn't really do as much with as I thought they would, but the guy that was working with Shield and ended up being the bus driver at one point when the bus picks him up from to go to Prague, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
That guy, his name, the first name of the character, which is escaping me right now, but the character's name is the villain, the Chameleon. And so what his powers was, obviously, is that he can portray different people convincingly. But they didn't really do anything with that other than having him as a character, and that was it. And so I think that was a setup for potential future villain. So we'll see where that goes. But I don't know if you noticed that or not.
I caught on that was that character, and I remember when we watched it together for the first time, you had mentioned
Right.
that was his alias. And I think Chameleon would really be an interesting facet to have in a movie because, like you said, you got a shapeshifter. It's almost like Mystique. He can
Right.
be anybody, anytime, anywhere, and that's a dangerous villain. It may not sound like a dangerous villain,
Right,
but
yeah.
given the parameters, if you combined, say somebody like a Mysterio and a Chameleon, that could be a really big problem for this particular Peter Parker.
True. And I wonder if in the future, if they do something with him, I wonder if they would somehow connect him to the Skrulls, maybe in this version, and perhaps he's a Skrull and goes by Chameleon at different times or whatever.
Right, that's like a code name or something.
Right. Or is he going to actually be the real villain, Chameleon? So we'll see. But I know the Skrulls have been involved in several ways, so.
Right.
It would be interesting to see if they connect those for the movies.
That would be really interesting. And speaking of scrolls, I feel like we are about that point to where it'd be appropriate to bring up the end credit scenes. Essentially, we've ran through most of hit the highlights,
Right,
if you will, of most of the movie. So the first end credit scene, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what I've deemed as the Peter Parker problem.
Yeah.
And so you know me, when we were waiting for the credits to roll, I'm a big mythos guy, in case anyone's wondering, listening out there. What I mean by mythos is I like to stay true to the fashion of the comic book characters. So, for example, it wouldn't be Batman if his parents were still alive. It wouldn't be Superman if he was not from Krypton, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So for me, at the end, you all know where I'm going here, who have watched the movie. It's one of those where Mysterio isn't one to go out on his own terms. He's going to have a plan B or plan Z, what have you, all the way to Z. So there's a little nugget, and you may not have caught it when you're watching the film, but I was able to the first time, thankfully, and I'm sure but you, Charlie, probably caught this your third time through. One of his operators has a USB drive hooked up to the laptop,
Right.
and he takes it out right as he passes, or supposedly passes. We're not quite sure yet. We'll see.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he's gone.
It remains to be seen. I realized at that moment, after leaving the theater, okay, that's when he had downloaded that video clip, if you will, of him revealing Spider-Man as Peter Parker. It was
Right.
tough for me to say there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand.
So, I mean, in the comic books, which we all know that the MCU is not necessarily always canon with the comic books, it's very rare that anybody knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. You've got Aunt May, you've got Mary Jane. I mean, really with Aunt May, it's more so implied.
Mhm.
But essentially, in this movie, that's why I deem it the Peter Parker problem. It seems as though everyone at the end of the movie knows, or at least the people that are familiar with who Peter Parker is up to that point, know who he is.
Right.
I mean, I'm wondering how they're going to fix this.
Yeah, I understand the negative feeling on it, and especially with the MCU, and pretty much everybody's identity is known but Spider-Man. He's been about the only one that has kept his identity secret. But at the same time, my feelings on it are there were several times in the comics where people did know that it was Peter Parker. Not 100% sure on how they fixed it in the comics, but there was always a way that they undid that and it went back to being secret identity. I don't know if they're going to do that in the MCU, but at the same time, Peter Parker now has the full force of Tony Stark's toys and company behind him. And so I think it's, if they don't somehow fix it, like maybe Doctor Strange does some kind of spell to undo that, or if they, show that Mysterio was such a fraud that nobody believes him at some point, I think that it's going to be okay, because just for the pure fact that Tony Stark, everybody knew Tony Stark was Iron Man, but as rich as he was and as powerful as he was, it wasn't really a threat. So I feel like if Peter Parker has the full force of his company and his toys and his defense systems, I think that he'll be safe. But at the same time, it does stray away from the Peter Parker comic book lore, so I understand the negativity behind it, but it's not bothering me near as much as it has bothered you. But I understand the negative feel towards it.
And I can also, and that's a great point to make about it, really, when you sit back and think about it. And for me, we talked about this before as well, that how fitting would it be if you end Phase 3 with sort of kind of how Phase 1 started, with the whole, iconic scene now of I am Iron Man.
Right.
Now, of course, this was against Peter Parker's will and choice.
True.
If he had it his way, nobody would know.
True.
Other than MJ and Ned. But here it is,
right,
out in the open to deal with. So, I see both sides.
Right.
But still doesn't bother me any less.
Right. I understand. And I will say that the fact that people do know who he is right now and the history that Aunt May has in the comics, it kind of makes me worry about her a little bit. Maybe her days are numbered. I don't know. But hopefully he can keep her safe. But I know that she has been the target of villains in the past when they've known that she was related to Spider-Man.
That was always a go-to for a number, a myriad, if you will, of villains, Mysterio included.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing that he did, if he's still around, presumably, for future films. You talk about pulling at heartstrings. I mean, to dangle Aunt May, or maybe not,
right,
in front of him, or any other loved ones, MJ, the list goes on and on. The troubles of being a superhero, folks.
Right.
And so, on that note, I feel like we can go ahead and shift gears if you're all right with it. And,
yeah, I'm good. Do we want to do any kind of, I guess, what do you call it, like scoring system where
we can?
We say our score for a movie, or
you want to go with how about we'll give it so many nerds? How about that?
Nerds? Oh, out of what? How many?
I think a 5-star system works pretty well for most people.
Okay.
So if we had to nerd rank Spider-Man Far From Home, I'll let you go first, and I'll see if I agree.
Okay. I would say that I would give it a 4 out of 5 nerds, just because there were bits and pieces that were nitpicky and maybe not the greatest parts of it, like the reveal of his identity and all that. But at the same time, I think it was a very well executed movie, and I think it was a good end for Phase 3. So what would you say?
I would have to agree with all that, and I think, just for sake of being different, I'm going to go with 4.5 nerds.
Really?
I don't know what a half nerd looks like. We'll do research and get back to you on that one. But I'm going to go the half, because even though I was bothered a little bit, a lot of it, by the reveal of him being Peter Parker, to me it was on par with Homecoming. And dare I say it, I think this encapsulation of Spider-Man, like you said at the very beginning, was the most comic book feel Spider-Man that we've gotten, both from a hero standpoint, villain standpoint, supporting characters, just start to finish. I was worried that the CGI would be too much, but I feel like it was all very appropriately done, and not in a goofy way, in a very serious and sometimes even a very dark way that was very effective.
And I'm not gonna lie, I think Marvel and Disney are pretty much the go-to for like the highest quality of CGI available right now.
So far from what we've seen, I mean, and especially if you get the opportunity to watch it in a Dolby Theater, we highly recommend that. It's just next level. It's like watching 4K on a big screen. It's as good as it gets.
Right.
So for me, and of course, I have a little bias being a Spider-Man fanboy, a webhead. That's also where the half comes into play.
Right.
For me, I think. But yeah, I would say 4.5, and definitely a recommendation to go see it. It's a family movie for everybody to enjoy.
Awesome. Awesome. I agree, and kind of surprised you gave it a little higher than I did, just in the fact of the reveal and everything, as much as it bothered you. But that's cool. So we'll get better at the scoring as time goes by.
Oh, I'm sure we'll be more tough.
But so, like I said, I would definitely recommend the movie as well. I think it was a great ending to Phase 3, which is what Kevin Feige has said. The Endgame was originally going to be the ending of Phase 3, but I don't know exactly. I guess because Peter is mourning Tony and everything, they've come out and said that that was really the ending of Phase 3. So now we're going to be going into Phase 4, and with Comic-Con being this weekend, Marvel being back at Hall H, we're looking at some
Big time.
pretty big reveals, and I'm excited to see what those are.
Oh, for sure. And that leads us into our next discussion, and also the second. So there are two, count them, two end credit scenes for Spider-Man: Far From Home, and the second one you more or less called all along when we were watching the movie the first time.
Right.
There were portions of that where Nick Fury, you had said, quote unquote, didn't quite feel like Nick Fury. If you remember in the movie, they explained there was a blip period, so that was their way of explaining the 5-year gap where the Thanos snap occurred.
Right.
Everyone gets brought back, and those people were blipped. And so I had thought initially wrote it off and said, well, he's probably just having a blip hangover. He's getting back.
I like that.
Into
Blip hangover.
Blip hangover. Trademark. But yes, we just thought, maybe he's just groggy coming back to get, if you were gone for 5 years, you might be a little different too.
True. And he even says at one point that, he went away and he knew everything, and he came back and now nothing, he can't tell anything from left to right, basically.
Right, and that really, to me, was a great use of misdirection in and of itself throughout the film, because in this second credit scene, we find out that Nick Fury is actually not Nick Fury, and he is one of the Skrulls, and not just one of the Skrulls, but kind of, to the best of our knowledge, the Skrull.
The leader, Talos. At least he was the leader in the comics. Now, I think he's still the leader, it seems like they're portraying him as, but I will be interested to see if all the Skrulls are good, because obviously they did do the misdirect and change in Captain Marvel, where they made them good and more like refugees in a war. But I have a feeling that there's going to be factions within the Skrull civilization of people that aren't necessarily the greatest, probably bad guys, because obviously the Skrulls are generally the villains. So I'll be interested to see where they go with that. But yeah, and watching the movie more than once, I will say that in several of his scenes, there are things that Nick Fury says that kind of tip off that he's not Nick Fury. Once you've seen it the first time, you might not catch all of them, but there's like one part where Nick Fury is introducing Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, to Peter Parker. He says to Peter Parker that Quentin Beck is from Earth, just not your Earth. And he says your Earth to Peter Parker instead of our Earth. So that alone kind of tips you off that he's not who he says he is. And then there's another part where Spider-Man's trying to convince him to get one of the other Avengers to take care of the situation so that he can enjoy his vacation. And he says something about, how about Captain Marvel? Why don't you get her? And Nick Fury says, don't invoke her name. Almost like she's like God level. And it kind of makes sense because that's kind of how they feel at the end of Captain Marvel. The Skrulls see her as an all-powerful being. So for him to say that, that's kind of another way he kind of tipped off that he's not Nick Fury. But there was just something about this goes to Samuel L. Jackson's acting abilities, because to me, and I've heard a few other people talk about it, but to me, I could feel that was not Nick Fury, and just he was not acting the same way as he has in all the other movies. But going back to the end credit scene where they reveal themselves to not be Nick Fury and Agent Hill, Maria Hill,
correct,
but as Talos and his wife, apparently Nick Fury has been in space on a ship, and I've heard a lot of people comment and suggest that is a nod to SWORD, a new group of kind of like SHIELD, but after SHIELD is disbanded, Nick Fury creates a new defense system called SWORD that is to combat more cosmic level threats.
Which brings us
So,
to Phase 4.
right.
Because I feel like we're going to get, I don't want to say cosmic heavy, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface. Think of the Marvel Cinematic Universe cosmos as an iceberg, if you will. And we've only grazed the surface with Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor, Captain Marvel, etc.
Right.
And I feel like we're about to put it this way: if Nick Fury is on vacay in space, it's because obviously needs some rest and relaxation. Of course, just dealt with
Right.
Endgame,
Right.
coming
Right.
back from that. But also that I think would tell us that there are, like you just hinted to, bigger things on the horizon. And by bigger, I mean Galactus.
Perhaps, and I mean, I hope so. I want to see Galactus. I want to see something about the Fantastic Four. I think that might be revealed at Hall H this year. I think obviously they're gonna kind of take their time with the X-Men.
Sounds like it.
Kevin Feige has even said that it's likely going to be years before we see the X-Men in the MCU. But I think the Fantastic Four would be a lot easier of introduction in the MCU, and Phase 4, Fantastic Four.
It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously Galactus would be a big part of that with the Silver Surfer, and yeah, I think we're going cosmic, especially with the announcement of the Eternals movie. So that's going to be a big part of Comic-Con, I believe. But what are your takes on?
For me, I think that the biggest movies that I'm looking forward to in Phase 4 has got to be sequel to Black Panther, so Black Panther 2. I'll be really interested to see the direction that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 goes, because who knows what could happen in that storyline. Is Thor still going to be with them? Is this going to be finally the movie where we get an Adam Warlock? It's hard to have the Infinity Gauntlet and all of its mythos without Adam Warlock. I mean, it's possible for the MCU to do it since we have yet to see him.
Right.
But we could still bring him into the fold, so I'm interested to see if that's going to be at play. Black Widow as her own solo film, that's going to be very interesting. I think we all obviously realize it'll probably be a prequel type of
and
movie.
I'm not concerned. I won't say concerned because it is the MCU and they haven't really flopped at anything yet. But I was a lot more excited about her movie before Endgame. So,
And that's fair. I think a lot of us were.
Right, but there's you never know. Obviously, they did take all the stones back to their locations at the end of Endgame, or so they said. So we'll see if you take the Soul Stone back to the Red Skull. Does that mean you get a soul back, or
right? And that's, I mean, again, that would be could be maybe a teaser. Honestly, especially for Guardians Volume 3, if you were to have that be an end credit scene, maybe someone's going back on a secret mission to Vormir. It's possible. But yeah, there's a lot of, I think there's, honestly, at this point, I think there's more question marks than answers is what we'll get from this
definitely
Saturday showing at Hall 4. But regardless, it's super exciting.
Yeah, I've also heard a theory that her movie could take place during that 5 years between Endgame and Infinity War, so maybe not necessarily a prequel, but I do think it will be more of an origin story just for the characters that they've already said are going to be in the movie, including a character that was, I guess, another spy that she was kind of rivals with during her time as a Russian spy. I don't know, so we'll see about that.
Twist.
But I am very excited for the movies that they have announced so far, but I think we'll get even more during Hall H.
Yeah. I'm hoping for a Spider-Verse, but that could be wishful thinking. I mean, we've already seen the animated version
Right.
Of the Spider-Verse, which if you haven't seen Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, you really need to go out and do so. It's available streaming on Netflix.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We could have a whole nother hour discussion about how good
Oh
that
yeah,
movie was.
and I'm not one to go for animated movies, but that movie was epic and very comic book accurate, and just you could tell that they were showing a lot of love to the Spider-Verse and to Spider-Man in general. But
they really did, and I think that's one of those movies where, and we won't, of course, go into that movie too much.
Maybe we'll do that in another episode.
We could, certainly could. But yeah, it's one of those where it almost kind of made you feel like a kid again, like you were just getting that first Spider-Man comic book off the rack, paid your own $2.50 for it, or however much comic books were when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It really took you back to just that warm, good feeling, just a feel-good movie, the definition of a feel-good movie.
Absolutely.
And so before we go, I think we also got to talk about Thor 4 and
Absolutely.
what that could bring.
Yeah, because I have heard like a lot of people right after Endgame were shouting, as Guardians of the Galaxy instead of Guardians 3, just for the pure fact that, Thor got on the ship with the Guardians to go off in space. So obviously we think that Thor will be in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but how much we don't know yet. I'm kind of hoping. I will say that I've read that I don't know if it was the writers of Thor or the writers of Endgame, somebody, or the director, I think it was James Gunn actually, that said, no, it's not going to be called as Guardians of the Galaxy. It's going to be Guardians of the Galaxy, so don't worry. But then something happened, was either today or yesterday, they announced that Thor 4 is happening with Taika Waititi coming back to direct it. So my thoughts on it are that they will probably maybe have him in the beginning of Guardians 3, and then maybe he'll go off and that'll be it. Or maybe he'll be involved in both. We don't know yet, but...
Which him going off and doing his own thing as Thor would make sense canon-wise and continuity-wise for the MCU, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's at the end of Endgame.
Mm-hmm.
When he's talking to the lead Valkyrie, he says, I'm going to go off and be myself, do my own thing. I've never had an opportunity. I've always been what others expect me to be. And so I think it would be neat to see him go off and become the mighty Thor. And just be,
And I really enjoyed what they did with the character in Endgame, but I really want him to go back to being Thor in the next Thor. Maybe go on a diet, cut his hair,
hit the Bowflex.
Yeah. But, I mean, like I said, I like what they did there. There was a lot more layers to Thor than anybody really realized, and I think that was what they were going for in Endgame with that character. So, but yeah, he did, in effect, he did leave Valkyrie as the leader of the Asgardians, and he went off to do his own thing. So we will see what happens with that. It'll be interesting to see if Thor 4 takes place on Earth or takes place in space or
that's
what.
One last point that I definitely want to make about Phase 4, which of course this is partially speculative, but in articles that I've read, it seems like there's going to be distinguished difference between MCU Earth and MCU Cosmos. I don't know that we'll see as much of a melding of the two that we got in those first 3 phases.
Yeah, I agree. I think I want to say that they will probably be moving, most of it will be cosmic, but having several of the characters' own stories happening on Earth. So those will be grounded, but I feel like the next Avengers, whenever they announce that, I think will take place as a big cosmic story. There's also still going back to the Skrulls, there's still an opportunity for, there being factions of the Skrulls that are bad, and so we might get into Secret Invasion storyline from the comics, or Secret Wars, or... there's so many possibilities. I am kind of hoping for whichever one the Russos said they would be willing to come back for.
Which I think that was Secret Wars.
I think it was Secret Wars, not Secret Invasion. But yeah, they said after Endgame that they were taking a break from the MCU, but whenever Feige said that he wanted to do Secret Wars or Secret Invasion, whichever one it was, they would be back to do it. So we'll see where that goes.
And if that happened, I don't think any of us would complain.
Absolutely.
Not one bit.
No. They made it what it is today. So, but yeah, so we'll learn a lot more hopefully this weekend.
Oh yeah, a lot of storylines to cover this weekend and see what happens. And with that, I think that's a good stopping point, and we'll leave our listeners with some suspense, as I know we're going to have the same amount of suspense leading into this weekend, and we will hope to have you all back on this Sunday, and we will go over pretty much everything that we can handle, that we can pack into a show.
We will definitely be keeping an eye on all the coverage of Comic-Con, and when we find out what you find out, we will be talking about it in the next episode.
On Sunday.
Sounds good.
So this has been the first edition of Nerdy by Nature. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Charlie, and we appreciate you listening.
God bless.